You ever wonder what it feels like when someone cheats you so blatantly, yet smiles in your face while doing it? That's exactly how I felt the day I realized Scott wasn't just a bad client. He was playing a game, and I was about to change the rules. My name is Daniel Harper, and I've spent most of my adult life buried in numbers, spreadsheets, and ledgers. Numbers have a comforting honesty. What you see is what you get. Unlike people, people lie. People cheat. And Scott was a master at it. It all started on a Thursday evening. I was at my friend Mark's apartment. Mark's not just a friend. He's also an accountant like me. He runs his own firm, mostly small to medium-sized businesses, and he's meticulous. The kind of guy who notices if a receipt is off by a penny. That night, he was pacing, beer in hand, muttering curses under his breath. I sank into his worn couch, trying to ignore the tension radiating off him like heat from an engine. "Mark, what's got you so fired up this time?" I asked casually, but I could tell by the way he didn't answer immediately that this wasn't just a petty annoyance. His eyes were distant, a storm brewing behind them. He stared at the ceiling, tapping the rim of his glass, and finally muttered a name. Scott. The name hit me like a punch. Scott, owner of 4 bars across 2 cities. A man who smiled, shook your hand, called you by your name, and simultaneously stole thousands without a second thought. I'd been to one of his bars the Thursday poker night. That place was always packed. People laughed, clinked glasses, and threw chips on the table like it was nothing. And yet, here was Mark, furious, saying Scott wasn't paying him. "Wait, you're telling me Scott's not paying you?" I asked, incredulous. My stomach twisted with disbelief. His place. It's always packed. Every Thursday. Full house. People love it. He can't be telling the truth about business being slow. Mark looked at me, his expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Really? You've been there?" I nodded. "Yeah, there's this new cash discount thing. 15% off if you pay in cash. I've noticed it every Thursday. People swarm the place for it. That's why it's packed, not because business is down." Mark leaned forward, eyes narrowing. A flicker of something dangerous danced across his face. "Cash discount. Huh," he murmured. His mind was already racing. That could explain a lot. It was at that moment I realized we were no longer talking about an unpaid invoice. Mark wasn't angry about money anymore. He was angry about deceit, about someone thinking they could manipulate him, cheat him, and walk away unscathed. That's when the spark lit, the spark that would consume both of us. Weeks passed. I couldn't stop thinking about Scott and his smirk, his flawless poker face, the way he made you feel insignificant while counting his cash. And then one evening, Mark called. "You going to Scott's poker night?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, intrigued. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," he replied. The next Thursday, we walked into Scott's bar. The familiar smell hit me immediately. Stale beer, a hint of cigarette smoke, and something else. The faint tang of desperation. The lights were low, casting long shadows over the crowded room. The poker tables were alive with the clicking of chips, the occasional cheer, and the tension of men and women waiting for luck to favor them. Mark was scanning everything. Not just the people, but the drinks, the cash registers, the menus. He had the look of a man on a mission. He was calculating, analyzing, dissecting the room like a surgeon. Halfway through the night, he leaned over. "Daniel, I think he's hiding money." "Not a little. A lot. This cash discount, the way Thursdays are packed, it doesn't add up to what he's reporting." I frowned. "You really think he's that dishonest?" Mark's eyes were burning now. "I know he is, and I'm going to prove it. Every single dollar he's lying about, I'm going to find it." That night, on the drive back to my place where he was crashing, Mark laid out his plan in painstaking detail. He would visit all 4 of Scott's bars, collect every menu price, every inventory number, compare that to payroll, rent, utilities. He would trace every transaction, every ledger, every slip of paper until there was no denying the truth. I listened, captivated. The excitement in his voice was infectious, but there was also something darker. A hunger, the kind of hunger that doesn't rest until justice is served. He wasn't just chasing money. He was chasing revenge. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Scott, about his smug grin, the way he laughed off invoices, the arrogance in his voice. I realized that this wasn't just about unpaid bills anymore. This was about proving a point, about showing that no one, no matter how smooth, could outsmart someone willing to see the truth. I was hooked. I was in, and I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. But one thing was certain: Scott was about to find out just how dangerous an accountant scorned could be. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of excitement and unease. Even after sleeping, the images of Scott's smirk, the chaotic poker night, and Mark's burning gaze lingered in my mind. There was a thrill in knowing something was about to happen, something that could change everything. But underneath that thrill was a gnawing sense of responsibility and danger. Mark wasn't just angry about money anymore. He was obsessed. And for the first time, I realized I was being pulled into his obsession, whether I wanted to be or not. Mark arrived at my apartment with a folder tucked under his arm, his eyes practically buzzing with purpose. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low and deliberate. "You know Scott isn't paying me, but he's also lying. Big time. And I think we can prove it." I raised an eyebrow. "Prove it? How?" He sat down, tapping the folder against the coffee table. Inside were spreadsheets, notes, and scribbled diagrams. I've been keeping track of what I know. Prices at his bars, how much alcohol he buys, payroll numbers, even rent and utility bills. It's all in there. If we map it out, we can see exactly how much revenue he's hiding. I stared at him, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't just numbers on paper. This was a blueprint for exposing a man who thought he was untouchable. "You're serious about this?" I asked. "Dead serious," he said. "We're going to go to every single one of his establishments. Take notes, compare inventory, cross-check with financials. If he's underreporting, it's massive. I'm talking millions over the years. And Daniel, this isn't just about me getting paid. This is about justice." That word justice hung heavy in the air. I could feel it, electric and insistent, like the current before a storm. Our first stop was the bar I already knew, Scott's Thursday poker night. We arrived early this time, long before the first customers trickled in. I watched Mark carefully observe everything. He didn't just glance at prices. He memorized them. He watched how much alcohol the bartender poured, the types of drinks being served, even the way customers tipped. Every detail mattered. "See that?" he whispered, pointing at a stack of unopened liquor boxes in the corner. "That's a month's supply for just the Thursday poker nights." But according to his books, he's barely moving half of it. Something's off. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The precision in his calculations, the way he noticed details I would have completely missed. It was both impressive and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Mark became almost invisible in his pursuit. He visited all 4 bars under the guise of casual inspections, friendly meetings, or even just watching the crowds. He took pictures discreetly, recorded prices, and jotted down every transaction he could see. Each evening, when he returned to my apartment, we would spread out the notes on the table like detectives at a crime scene. "Look at this," he said one night, sliding a sheet toward me. "If we only consider alcohol sales, he's underreporting by at least 35%. And that's just 1 month. Extrapolate that over a year, and we're talking serious money." I leaned over, tracing the numbers with my finger. It was staggering. He wasn't just cheating Mark. He was lying to the IRS, hiding income, and padding his pockets while pretending to be a respectable businessman. "What about the other costs?" I asked. "Payroll, rent, utilities, food," he replied. "Everything lines up with his purchases, but the revenue? That's the problem. He's using a small fraction of cash to cover expenses, but the rest millions over the years has never been reported." As the nights dragged on, I began to notice a change in Mark. He was meticulous, obsessive, and increasingly restless. He barely slept, often sitting in the living room late at night, running numbers over and over in his head. I tried to sleep, but the quiet tapping of his keyboard, the murmur of calculations, it kept me awake. "Daniel," he said one night, eyes glowing with a strange intensity, "I've been thinking. I don't want repayment from Scott. I want something bigger. I want justice in the way that actually hurts him." "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity tinged with fear. "The IRS," he said simply. "I'm going to file a whistleblower report. They'll investigate Scott, and if they find what I suspect, he's done. His empire gone. And we could get a reward 15 to 30% of what they collect. Millions, Daniel, millions, and he won't see it coming." I felt a thrill mixed with dread. The scope of what we were talking about was massive. We weren't just chasing an unpaid invoice anymore. This was war. Over the next month, Mark dove deeper. He cross-referenced supplier invoices with reported revenue. He examined payroll records, comparing the number of employees to hours worked and wages paid. He mapped out every bar individually, noting patterns, cash flows, and suspicious gaps. And then there was the human element. Scott's arrogance was consistent, almost poetic in its hubris. He would boast to staff about his successful business empire, laugh off complaints, and flaunt wealth that didn't match the numbers. Mark recorded every detail, every slip of the tongue, every sign that Scott thought he was untouchable. One evening, after a long day of visiting bars, Mark leaned back in my chair, exhausted but exhilarated. "Daniel, I've got it. I've got the proof. This isn't a hunch anymore. This is solid. Scott has been underreporting revenue by at least 35 to 40% every year for the past. I don't even know how long. And he thinks no one knows. I looked at him, feeling a mix of awe and fear. So, what now? Now, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. We wait for the right time. And then we strike. The weeks that followed were filled with intense rhythm visits to bars, meticulous notes, late-night calculations, and a quiet anticipation that grew heavier with each passing day. Every time we saw Scott, every time he smiled, counted cash, or laughed at his employees, the fire inside Mark and now inside me grew stronger. I began to realize something profound. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about justice, about showing someone who thought they were untouchable that no one, not even Scott, could hide forever. And for the first time in years, I felt that exhilarating mix of fear, excitement, and purpose. Scott wasn't just a client. He was a target. And we were ready. By the time we reached part 3 of our investigation, I felt like I had been living in a different world, a world where numbers told secrets and every small detail mattered. It was almost addictive, this meticulous peeling back of layers, revealing something no one else could see. And what we were uncovering about Scott, it was staggering. It all started one gray Thursday morning. I remember the rain tapping against my apartment window, each droplet sounding like a drumbeat to the storm. Building inside Mark, he was already at the table, surrounded by spreadsheets, receipts, and stacks of invoices. The room smelled faintly of coffee and stale papers, a scent that had become strangely comforting over the weeks. "Daniel," he said, not even looking up, "I've been going over Scott's books again. Every transaction, every purchase, every reported sale. It's worse than I thought." I leaned forward. "Worse how?" "Millions, Daniel," he whispered, almost reverently. "This isn't just a few missing dollars. Over the past few years, he's underreported his revenue consistently by at least 20 to 25%. But last year, he went full-on 35 to 40% under. He's literally been lying to the IRS for years." I felt my stomach drop. I had known Scott was shady, but this was on another level. And the thing that made it even more infuriating was his arrogance. He didn't just cheat. He flaunted it. Every time we visited one of his bars, he smiled at the staff, laughed at customers, and counted cash like it was his divine right. He had no idea the walls were closing in, no idea that every move was being documented. Mark spread out another set of papers. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the numbers. "Compare his liquor purchases to what he's claiming as revenue. According to the books, he's barely covering costs. But in reality, he's selling way more than he reports. That cash discount trick, he's using it to funnel money off the books. It's brilliant. In a criminal sort of way." I felt a chill run down my spine. Brilliant, yes, but infuriating. Every day Scott went about his life, laughing, oblivious, while he was essentially robbing the system and us blind. Over the next few weeks, our investigation became almost surgical. Mark would visit the bars alone sometimes, blending in as a casual customer, scribbling notes in the dim corners of the establishment. Other times, I would accompany him, pretending to be a poker buddy or a curious patron. Every price, every tip, every inventory count mattered. He had developed this uncanny ability to see patterns where I would only see chaos. One night, we were sitting in my apartment, late, exhausted, but exhilarated. The rain had stopped, leaving the city damp and glimmering under the streetlights. Mark leaned back, eyes wild with the thrill of discovery. "Daniel, I think I know exactly how much he owes me now. And it's not just for the invoices. If we do this right, we're talking a number that could buy a house, a car, a life he can't imagine." I swallowed hard. "Are you serious? This isn't just revenge, it's massive." "Yes," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real kicker? This is where we go from personal payback to, let's call it, poetic justice. If the IRS sees what I've documented, Scott's empire could collapse. The whistleblower reward, it would dwarf what he owes me. And I'm not even exaggerating. I remember the feeling that hit me then. Fear, excitement, anticipation, and satisfaction all tangled together. I could almost taste it, the sweet, inevitable downfall of a man who thought he was untouchable. The next phase of the investigation required patience and precision. Mark began to create cross-referenced sheets, liquor orders versus reported revenue, payroll versus staff hours, rent versus sales income. Every gap, every anomaly, every suspicious discrepancy was highlighted. Sometimes he would pause and mutter to himself, shaking his head in disbelief at the audacity of it all. "Look at this," he said one night, tapping a spreadsheet like it was a weapon. "He's underreporting drinks by 40% last quarter alone. And this isn't a one-off. This is a systematic pattern. Every year, it's the same. He's been hiding millions, Daniel. Millions he thinks no one can trace." The magnitude of it hit me. Millions. And yet, Scott had continued to smile, laugh, and condescend. He was oblivious to the storm brewing, completely unaware that his empire was being dissected by the one man he thought was powerless to stop him. As we dug deeper, Mark's obsession grew. He spent nights at my apartment, surrounded by coffee cups, receipts, and spreadsheets, muttering calculations under his breath. I watched him become a man transformed, not just angry, but methodical, precise, relentless. He wasn't doing this out of greed anymore. He was doing it because he could, and because Scott needed to be stopped. One evening, he turned to me with a strange, almost dangerous smile. "Daniel, do you realize what we're about to do? This isn't just about getting paid. This is about showing him that arrogance and deceit have consequences. This is about making sure he can't just laugh at people and cheat the system anymore." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. "And the IRS?" Mark's eyes gleamed. "That's where the real hammer comes down. They'll see what we've documented, and they'll move fast. And trust me, when they do, Scott will regret ever thinking he could outsmart us." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Scott, the way he had looked at Mark as if invoices were meaningless, the way he counted cash like it was his birthright, the way he laughed at the chaos of his own empire. And I imagined the moment when all that would come crashing down. The thrill of anticipation was almost intoxicating. Every hour, every calculation, every note brought us closer to the day when Scott would face consequences he couldn't ignore. And with each passing day, Mark's plan became clearer, more detailed, more inevitable. By now we had the pieces. All that remained was assembling them into a coherent, whole blueprint for destruction that would leave Scott exposed, humiliated, and powerless. And the thought of it filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Perfect, calculated, and devastating justice. It felt surreal the morning Mark told me he was finally ready. Months of painstaking investigation, endless nights poring over receipts, spreadsheets, and cash flows all leading to this moment. The plan wasn't reckless. It was precise, calculated down to the last detail. And yet, even knowing that, my stomach churned with nerves. "We have everything," Mark said, voice low, almost reverent. His hands hovered over a thick stack of documents, copies of invoices, photographs, spreadsheets cross-referencing every bar, every drink, every transaction. "We file this with the IRS as a whistleblower report. They'll investigate Scott, and when they do, everything he's hidden for years, exposed, gone, pulverized." I took a deep breath, staring at the mountain of evidence. This wasn't just about getting back the money Scott owed us. This was bigger, much bigger. The reward from the IRS Whistleblower Program alone could change our lives. And Scott, well, he wouldn't even see it coming. The process wasn't quick. Filing a whistleblower report is like dropping a match into a carefully stacked pile of gasoline. It ignites a chain reaction, but you don't know exactly when the flames will reach the top. Mark, of course, had a lawyer guiding us through the bureaucratic maze, ensuring every piece of evidence was airtight, every claim legally solid. There were forms, affidavits, notarizations, enough paperwork to bury a small army. While we waited for the IRS to take notice, life continued around us. Scott carried on as if nothing had changed, counting cash, laughing with bartenders, boasting about his empire. Every time we went to one of his bars under the guise of casual visits, I could feel the tension coiling tighter in my chest. One wrong move and we could be discovered. But even the thought of that didn't deter Mark. If anything, it made him sharper, more focused. One night, after yet another session of poring over numbers, Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Daniel, I keep thinking about it. If Scott had just paid me what he owed months ago, none of this would have happened. All of this. All this revenge. All this planning. Unnecessary. But he didn't. And now, look at him. Every moment he spent being arrogant, every dollar he tried to hide. It's going to come back to him." I nodded, feeling a dark satisfaction. He really has no idea what's coming. Weeks turned into months. There were periods of silence, waiting for responses from the IRS, interspersed with tense moments when we would check in obsessively, reread emails, cross-check timelines. Every day we waited was a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I'd never realized how addictive that tension could be, the feeling of standing on the edge, knowing something monumental was about to happen. Then, finally, the breakthrough came. We received confirmation that the IRS had accepted the whistleblower report and had started a formal investigation into Scott's operations. Every calculation, every spreadsheet, every photograph we had collected was now being scrutinized by the authorities. The magnitude of it hit me like a punch. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was legal, methodical, unstoppable justice. I remember the moment Mark told me, voice barely audible with excitement, "Daniel, they're coming down hard. This is it." Everything he's hidden for years, it's about to be exposed. His bars, his accounts, his empire. All of it. I felt a rush of adrenaline. Months of tension, late nights, obsessive calculations, all culminating in this moment. I could almost hear Scott's smug grin cracking under pressure, though he didn't even know it yet. The investigation wasn't simple. There were requests for additional documentation, back and forth emails, and endless clarifications. Every step had to be precise, or the entire whistleblower case could collapse. But Mark was meticulous. I watched him answer every query with calm precision, his confidence growing with each exchange. And then came the first signs of Scott realizing something was wrong. One evening, we overheard from a bartender at one of the bars. Scott's been asking a lot of questions. He's worried about taxes, I guess. Something about his filings being audited. Mark's smirk was almost cruel. Finally, the first cracks. The process dragged on, but the outcome became inevitable. Weeks later, news filtered through that the IRS had concluded Scott's underreporting was extensive millions of dollars over several years. His financial empire was crumbling under scrutiny, and the authorities were recouping the funds. Every dollar hidden, every deceit, every lie meticulously calculated by Mark and me laid bare for the world. I remember sitting in my apartment, the rain tapping against the window again, a dark mirror of the day we started this. Mark looked at me, eyes gleaming with triumph. "Daniel, I think it's safe to say we've won. He won't be running those bars for long." And everything he thought was untouchable? Gone. A week later, Mark received the official whistleblower reward. The exact number? He never told me. But from what I could infer, it was enough to wipe out debts, buy a house, maybe even retire early. The satisfaction on his face, the way he leaned back and let out a long, slow sigh that was revenge, measured, complete, and perfectly justified. I couldn't help but think about Scott wherever he was. How he had laughed at invoices, how he had flaunted his wealth, how he had thought himself clever, and now every empire built on deceit comes tumbling down. Every arrogance has a price. And in that moment, I understood the intoxicating power of patience, precision, and righteous anger. We didn't celebrate loudly. There was no fanfare. Just quiet satisfaction, the kind that seeps into your bones. Justice had been served. Scott had been exposed. Mark had been repaid in the most thorough, permanent way imaginable. And as for me, I had witnessed the entire process, the slow burn of strategy and patience, the thrill of seeing someone who thought they were untouchable brought down by meticulous skill and determination. And all it had taken was a refusal to back down, a careful eye, and a relentless pursuit of truth. I remember the day it finally really hit me, that Scott's empire, the one he had built on deceit, arrogance, and sheer audacity, was gone. It wasn't just numbers on a sheet anymore. It wasn't just spreadsheets, receipts, or meticulous calculations. It was real, tangible, and irreversible. Weeks of waiting had led to this moment. Weeks of obsessive calculations, surveillance, and sleepless nights. Mark had been relentless, and every single detail of Scott's lies, every fraudulent report, every cleverly hidden cash transaction, it was all laid bare before the IRS. And now, the consequences were unfolding. The first indication of his downfall came from a quiet, almost gloating phone call from Mark. "Daniel," he said, voice low but sharp, "Scott's bars. They're being shut down. Licenses suspended. Bank accounts frozen. Every little empire he bragged about, collapsing." I felt a rush of adrenaline. There's a unique satisfaction in seeing someone who has thought themselves untouchable slowly unravel. And the way Scott had carried himself, smug, arrogant, untouchable, made it all the sweeter. We had chosen our strategy carefully. We didn't need confrontation. We didn't need shouting matches. We had numbers. We had evidence. And the law, in all its precise, unyielding power, was on our side. It was poetic, really. A man who had manipulated every system, every person, every law, finally caught in the one place he couldn't escape: meticulous accounting. Mark leaned back in his chair one evening, the weight of months of work finally settling on his shoulders. "You know, Daniel," he said slowly, "all of it could have been avoided. If he had just paid me when he was supposed to, none of this would have happened. It would have been simple. He could have written a check and saved himself months of chaos. But no, he had to be a crook. He had to cheat. And now..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what he meant. Now, Scott was facing consequences far worse than simply paying a few invoices. I remember the moment I saw the news. Scott's financial empire had been seized. The IRS had calculated the underreported revenue over several years, millions of dollars, in fact. The whistleblower reward, though confidential, would be astronomical. Enough to pay off debts, buy a new house, maybe even retire early. Mark had never disclosed the exact figure, but the gleam in his eyes spoke volumes. It was the culmination of months of strategy, patience, and obsession. Every sleepless night, every meticulous note, every visit to his bars, it had all led here. And the best part? Scott didn't see it coming. He had been so confident, so cocky, so untouchable. And now, nothing. His bars, his accounts, his empire gone. Pulverized by the very person he thought powerless. I remember sitting across from Mark one evening, the city lights casting long shadows in his apartment. "It's almost beautiful," I said quietly, "watching all of it fall apart." "All of it." Mark smiled, a slow, satisfied grin. "It is. Justice isn't always flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, precise, calculated. And this is perfect." We didn't celebrate loudly. There was no fanfare, no champagne, no cheers. Just quiet satisfaction, the kind that sinks deep into your bones. Scott had been arrogant, deceitful, and cruel. He had underestimated Mark. He had underestimated the law. And most importantly, he had underestimated me, Daniel Harper, the guy who watched, took notes, and witnessed every step of the downfall. As I reflect on it now, months later, the lessons are clear. Justice is patient. Revenge is sweetest when earned. And arrogance is a fatal flaw. Scott thought himself untouchable, but meticulous preparation, attention to detail, and a refusal to back down turned the tide completely. Mark never told me the exact amount of the whistleblower reward, and I didn't need to know. The satisfaction was in seeing the collapse, the ruin, the utter disbelief on Scott's face as the walls closed in. The money, well, that was just the icing on the cake. The last time I saw Scott, he didn't recognize me. He looked smaller, diminished, broken. Not physically, but morally, financially, and emotionally. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just satisfaction, but peace. Justice, I realized, isn't always about confrontation or shouting. Sometimes it's about strategy, patience, precision, and when you finally see it unfold, there's a profound beauty in it, a quiet, devastating triumph. And so, Scott's story ended not with a bang, but with the slow, inevitable collapse that comes from underestimating someone who refuses to be cheated. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could after months of obsession and tension. Mark was finally able to relax, pay off debts, and even dream about future ventures. I carried the lesson with me. Never underestimate the power of knowledge, patience, and righteous anger. Every cheat, every lie, every arrogant smirk has consequences. And sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is the one that is carefully calculated and leaves no room for escape. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And of course, subscribe for more stories like this, where patience, precision, and justice meet in the most thrilling ways.